Today's visual novel is Rose Gun's Days, Season 1. Since it's going to be a rather lengthy game, I decided to split up the review into 4 parts as I read it. Also, it might be fun to see how my opinion of the story changes over time, so I hope no one minds that too much. Rose Gun's Days stars Leo Shishigami and Rose Haibara. Leo is a war veteran who has recently made it back to his homeland of Japan after losing a war between America and China. Unfortunately for him, the previous state of Japan has now completely changed from what he knew from his childhood. Japanese shops and restaurants are a rarity, and even their own language is not of much use anymore. Also, Japanese people in general are not treated with much respect, and worst of all, they certainly are not provided easy access to jobs, especially those who can't speak English, like Leo. Only females are really able to find work because they are allowed to sell their bodies via prostitution to make up the cash they need to provide for themselves. Suffice to say, Leo is in a bind right now from the beginning as he's not only male, can't speak English, but is also running low on funds. Thankfully, it's not soon after that he comes in contact with Rose Haibara, the madam or leader of a club by the name of Primavera. I might be pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. Primavera is a club for ladies of the evening, as the game likes to call it, to do their business safely without worry of dealing with the dangers of selling themselves on the street. Leo manages to help with a few tussles that Rose faces, and as such is offered employment to be a bodyguard for Primavera. Thus begins his new life as he tries to get along with his fellow bodyguards, protect Primavera from any dangers it might be exposed to, as well as providing support for Rose in her darker times of need. Like said before, this will only be a review of Season 1, so I will come back and comment on it again in the final part. One of the main strengths of Rose Gun Days is the unique setting it provides. For once, we don't have a visual novel that involves a high school harem in any way, as the balance between male characters and female characters are equal for a change. Thank God. Also, we've been given a mature, adult protagonist who still has a playful side, so he'll clearly come off very different from most protagonists you're exposed to in the medium. So basically what I'm saying is, if you're craving something fresh in terms of everything it provides, Rose Gun's Days certainly fits the bill. Plus, the setting is wonderfully realized and is easily the most complex part of the story. It does a great job of establishing the inner politics, the feelings of those in power and those without power, the roles of men and women, as well as the different cultures and how they play a role as well. Thankfully, while there is definitely some establishment, the author doesn't go too crazy with info dumping at all, and most of the sections are brief, and a lot of things can be provided just based on people's actions and conversations between certain groups of characters. However, once again, much like Umineko, it just makes me wish more visual novels would be more creative with their setting. So now it's only going to serve to make me more picky. Overall, the setting is awesome, and clearly the writer put a lot of work into it. The best thing about it is just by being exposed to it for a little while, you can easily see where the motives of a lot of characters are coming from, and that's whether they make decisions for the greater good, or whether they're just being selfish about it. Story-wise, the game does spend a little bit establishing the core cast and setting, but thankfully, it does this in a timely and enjoyable manner. The pacing of Rose Gun's Days so far is damn near perfect actually, as it manages to reveal plot threads and character motivations while also establishing chemistry between the main cast. Never did I feel like characters were just faffing about for a period of time and making useless conversations, like most other visual novels do, as most conversations and events feel meaningful, at least in some way. Also, Ryukishi managed to fix the main problem I had with Umineko's pacing, in that individual scenes would go on for an overextended length of time, which sometimes made them wear out their welcome. While here, everything is paced evenly and concisely, but still manages to make quite a few powerful moments. They don't feel like they're rushed either, is the thing. I will say it isn't really until Chapter 4 where the story really starts to get rolling, but I was plenty entertained by the previous 3 chapters, and they didn't overstay their welcome, so I can't even call the game necessarily slow. And plus, it's still lightning speed compared to most visual novels. Once you get to Chapter 4, both the tension and excitement skyrocket, and basically until the end of the season, it's a non-stop thrill ride. I feel bad for people who read Chapter 5 at the end and had to wait for more because the finish is amazing and is seriously one of the most exciting things I've ever taken part of in a visual novel. I suppose the gameplay add-on actually surprisingly added to that, somehow, which I'll cover now. So yes, Rose Gun Days does have a battle system of sorts. It's a very simple one that only requires the use of the mouse though, so nothing that makes you do too much work. Basically, there are two modes, offense and defense. In offense, you click these blue flashes until you've hit enough of them to do a card finisher, which is done by right-clicking. In defense, you simply wave your mouse around on the red flashes with no clicking required. The thing that kind of makes it work is the fact that you have a time limit, in which case if you screw up, it lowers your score. Even in normal video games, whenever you include a time limit onto an activity, it really will up the tension and the amount of attention you'll be given to a game because mistakes are much more devastating than games without time limits. Just try playing Dust Force. Jesus. So suffice to say, despite its simplicity, it does a good job of complementing the tense action moments. No need to worry about a game over though, which in a normal game I would say is kind of lame, but since Rose Gun Days is a visual novel and is a story-oriented, it helps it from being too annoying. Of course, you can also skip the battle system entirely if you just simply don't care for it, so there's that as well. But I don't think the end of Chapter 5 would have been nearly as fun if I had done that, so it's my personal recommendation that you give it a try. The characters are, as expected of Ryukishi, very strong, all having wonderful, well-realized characterization, multifacets to their personality, individual beliefs and stripes, as well as great chemistry with one another. Some people might accuse Leo as being overcompetent, and there's no doubt that he is the most competent character. However, unlike, say, Kirito from Sword Art Online, he doesn't deem the other characters useless, which is really the problem that an overcompetent character has, is you don't want them to basically make the other characters seem like they suck entirely and that they have no use in that, because Kirito can basically do everything by himself for the most part in Sword Art Online, and the other characters have no purpose, while in this game that's not the case at all. Everyone gets their chance to shine in this game, much like Umineko, and it's not like Leo can just power drive through any situation just because he's awesome. Though I won't kid you, Leo is a straight up badass, and if he keeps this up, he will easily be one of the top visual novel main characters. His playful nature, witty dialogue, and chemistry with everyone around him just makes him impossibly fun and likable. I personally love how the writers handle the relationship between Rose and Leo, as it's not really shoved in your face how much they care about each other, but it's pretty easy to see why they do. But that goes for every pair of characters, from Cyrus and Richard to Stella and Meryl. And while the cast doesn't seem like it will be quite as flawed and complex as Umineko's cast, tackling the other angle of making a very appealing cast is certainly one I can take. I liked and found interest in just about every character, which is not really something I can say for the majority of visual novels. This here is a clear winner. The production side, by Ryukishi's standard, is probably the weakest element, not counting the PS2 version of Higurashi or the PS3 version of Umineko, of course. The art is much better than his previous works, of course, because he hired additional artists, but it's still too inconsistent between characters. Characters like Leo, Cyrus, and Wayne look fine, while characters like Claudia and Alfred look a bit overly amateur, because it's Ryukishi drawing them more than likely. The resolution of the visual novel is incredibly small, and Ryukishi really needs to update his software or something, because it's something like 640 by 480, which suffice to say is very outdated compared to the age of widescreen visual novels. Also, there is no voice acting, and several sound effects are reused from Umineko and Higenbana. Thankfully, the writing is so good you probably won't miss the voice acting too much. Plus, two things kind of made me forgive most of this. That is the absolutely stellar soundtrack, which is of course expected of a 7th expansion, and the wonderful directing of the scenes. Despite having no advanced CG other than the ones included in the battle system, the game handles the execution of scenes very well. This is no more present than the end of Chapter 5, of course, which really I keep harking about because it was that damn awesome! The battle tracks, of course, kick ass, and the jazzy tracks are wonderful as well. It's easy to call this one of the best visual novel soundtracks ever, and I haven't even heard all the tracks. So yes, the production has its ups and downs, but hopefully most people can forgive it due to it having its positives to make up for it. Don't let a lack of voice acting and hentai scenes keep you from reading this game, though. Overall, if it's not apparent, I think Rose Gun Days is awesome. The cast, setting, music, and pacing are all great, which make it a fun as hell ride. Granted, I haven't read the rest to know for sure if it's consistent, but so far if it keeps this up, I might like this visual novel just as much as Umineko and Steins Gate, which are my two favorites. I recommend it to anyone who wants a unique setting or for people who just want another action visual novel. Even if you don't like mafia plots, I still think there's enough good in here to make it worth a try. Now it's time for spoiler time! I like Rose Gun's Days Season 1 so much I'll discuss my thoughts on every chapter. If you don't want to be spoiled, then don't go past here. So in Chapter 1, it's mainly Leo going around trying to see if he can find work like said before. He's got a small share of money to grant him some leeway before he runs out, and it's here he learns a small bit of the bland state of Japan. It was a great little way for us to learn about the ups and downs of the setting, mainly the downs though, while getting us used to Leo's core personality. One interesting thing you learn here, or at least I believe it's here, is that a lot of men really wish they were not born Japanese, or at the very least, not born male. This is because, like said before, that women can sell their bodies and thus it's easier for them to find jobs. However, this is also subverted later when the obvious fact is revealed that this only works for a short period of time in women's lives, because this same work would not be available to them later when they're older. So while men are jealous of them presently, it's certainly not just a free pass for women either. And even though they're able to work presently, they still have to deal with the insecurity of men being difficult with them. For example, there's a scene where a girl's boyfriend comes back from the war who continually badgers her for money. While it seems he used to have a good relationship with her, because of his bitterness towards the war, his inability to find a job, and his jealousy of women for being able to find jobs he can't, he treats her like a piece of trash. This character isn't even given much screen time or even really development, but it's an example of how the setting has done a lot of the work for you to justify a character's actions. This is continually done throughout Season 1, and I hope the trend only proceeds with later seasons. Later on, Leo goes to Club Primavera, in which case a little tussle breaks out with a gang led by a man named Mad Alfred. Because they are basically the top controlling gang in the area, they go around demanding money from shops and other places. In return, they won't mess with them. However, the leader of Primavera, Rose, does not want to do this because the money is for the ladies that work there. They of course get violent, and it seems like things can't possibly end well. However, Leo pops in and basically saves the day with ease by showing he's straight up badass, like said before. Unfortunately for them, that isn't really the end of it, as the gang leader Alfred feels provoked by this and orders the rest of the gang to capture Rose. This is done by first capturing one of the ladies that works there by the name of Claudia, and using her as bait for Rose to be dragged out. Of course, Rose agrees to this even though she knows it's possibly a trap. This is your first exposure to the gentle but naive heart that she has, and while at the current time it doesn't really hurt her, you can tell that later on it probably will. She of course gets captured, but thankfully Leo is clever enough to save her right back. This was a rather simple section, of course, as it basically resembled your typical kind of Hollywood movie plot, but it was an effective way to establish quick chemistry between the characters. I like the fact that people find Leo fun, but no one is straight up humping his leg, a common trait in visual novels for the badass character. Of course, Wayne is a bit anal toward him because he's jealous of his skills and he wants to show that he can protect Rose on his own, but Wayne never comes across as annoying even here because of how self-aware the other characters are of his behavior, which makes for a lot of fun moments. Of course, I'll have to establish the main complaint I have with Season 1 here though, and that's in Alfred's character. He comes across as fairly lame and generic for a villain and really serves more as a plot point than anything. However, thanks to him not really overstaying his welcome and the great pacing of Rose Gun's Days, it's only really a minor complaint. Plus, even though he feels overly simple, he does somehow manage to complement Leo's character. See, the great thing about Leo is he treats all the characters in the story with respect. This goes across both genders and whether they're friend or foe. Though some people might find his sexual comments a bit much at times, though this is only done modestly, thankfully. I just found it hard to find anything to not like about this guy. But yeah, fun first chapter. Chapter 2 introduces us to a new character by the name of Philip Butler. Butler! Yeah, this is quite amusing and definitely an Easter egg. His theme song even plays with the lyrics, "Love will win away, baby," making his presence kind of hilarious at times. He also shares Butler's love for breast and his goofy laugh. However, that's basically where the similarities end, as the two really are nothing alike at all. Butler is a crafty, sneaky, and conniving person who always puts his real intentions under a playful mask. Basically, he's kind of a moderator for City 23, which is the area that Primavera is located in under the American forces. Primavera wants his support because he can provide them with protection to the point where they wouldn't have to worry about gangs and the light interfering with their business, as well as a few other goals that Rose has in mind for later. Of course, he can't just simply offer his services, even though he does comment that he does have a lot of affection for Rose and Club, so some other services from her are required from her other than just protection money. Therefore, Primavera ends up taking a job that essentially would make Butler look good so that he would have more power in his position and would be able to provide Primavera with the services they requested. Once again, most of the point of this chapter is to expand upon the setting a bit more and learn the strife between the different cultures and races, as the case involves finding an American who got involved with a Japanese woman and the mafia is after both of them. The gang eventually finds the two and Rose ends up having to fork over a lot of money in order to get them both off safely. Of course, these actions seem questionable and overly naive because the question arises that is Rose just going to continue helping everyone who needs a hand, which is something Amanda passively aggressively continues to lecture her on. However, it is also once again shows how caring a person she is, because regardless if the person was a prostitute, which is something society these days would normally look down on, she was willing to help with all her heart regardless of it having to do with getting Butler on her side. It's this side of her that binds all of her comrades to her and makes them extremely loyal to her despite the fact that they themselves may question her actions at times. Of course, the other benefit is that they are able to get Butler's support, so seemingly all's well that ends well. However, then comes Chapter 3, and Mad Alfred is out of the hospital, which of course means a lot of trouble. Before that happens though, Rose discusses with Richard on the possibility of engaging their business with Japanese merchants instead of American merchants. This is because she wants to support her culture because of her father's upbringing, and possibly give way for a mean to support the several unemployed workers in the city. While it seems that Richard, being the methodical and calculating guy that he's shown to be, would be against this, this is actually what leads him to becoming fully loyal to Rose. Even though it means less money for Primavera, because Rose is clearly thinking of the future and making way for a better life for Japanese people, it's clearly what Richard wants as well, because Richard has a child of his own to take care of. Well, it's not biologically his, but he's in charge of raising it. He also wants to support a better future for the child. Once again, another strong use of the setting doing a lot of the work for you on why Richard would be supportive of the decision she's making. Much like his previous works, you can tell the author is just putting a lot of love and care into all the characters, and not just Leo and Rose, which is something a lot of visual novels are guilty of as they tend to overfocus on the main character. What's concerning is whether or not Butler would be supportive of this decision, but thankfully he agrees that it will make life easier for him as well, because more employed Japanese workers would lead to less conflict and make his job easier as well, and make him look better too. So Primavera ends up planning a party for Butler in order to celebrate their union. But Mad Alfred's hoping to crash that party, of course. Primavera can't rely on Butler's support for this, unfortunately, as this party's not only for his enjoyment, but also to make him look appeasing. So they end up having to tackle this issue without him finding out about it. Once again, it's another Hollywood action-styled fun-as-hell chapter that clearly lets all the characters, including Rose, shine. I love the scene where she started singing to distract the officers from the Primavera workers leaving, as it not only brought about an unexpected talent from Rose, but it showed how important culture really is to the citizens in the visual novel are. Like I said, Mad Alfred is a rather simple character by Ryukishi standards, but the fight between him and Leo was fun, so I'm not going to really complain too much here. So after he's defeated, it's time for Chapter 4. You think that everything is going Primavera's way in this chapter, but by defeating Alfred, they only end up making things harder for themselves. This is because defeating him gave way to a new underworld boss by the name of Caleb. Once again, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. His true identity is actually someone who's been bonding with Leo for a bit and wants Leo on his side because they've experienced the same kind of hardships of war together. At first, he seems like a friendly, outgoing, and likable person, but that view on him soon changes in this chapter. Caleb has a somewhat similar goal to Rose, but he's much more aggressive about it. Essentially, he wants to provide work and food to all the homeless and hungry Japanese workers and the ex-soldiers from the war. The problem is, unlike Rose, who is taking a slow and steady approach to eventually fix things in the long run, Caleb wants things to improve immediately. His first goal is to take advantage of the fact that Mad Alfred is down to ensure he has control over the entire underworld. This makes it almost ironic that Primvera went to the trouble of beating him, as it basically unleashed Caleb, who is far more trouble than Alfred was. Once he accomplishes this, he begins to extract money from various businesses, and this includes wanting to extract them from Primvera. Unfortunately, Butler can't really help Primvera with this issue because Caleb is almost too big of a problem to deal with calmly. And while the American forces certainly could, the consequences of dealing with this guy are too extreme to just do it casually. Caleb demands that Rose surrender Primvera to him and give out large sums of money in the same fashion that Mad Alfred did. However, Rose denies this exchange because doing so would deny the reason for Primvera's initial existence. Unfortunately, the consequences of denying this exchange are a bit more than she can bear, as several people that she does business with are not only troubled immensely by Caleb as a result, but some are even killed. This leads to Rose wanting to immediately surrender to Caleb because she can't bear the guilt. Now, some people perhaps could find Rose a bit annoying at this part, but it's done rather believably because of the naivety of her character. After all, Mad Alfred hasn't done anything quite this horrible to her yet, so you could say she thought she knew what she could expect. But little did she know that this one foe was not one to be treated lightly. Though ironically, it's the very decision to oppose Caleb that leads to the other characters around her admiring her even more, even though she herself feels as though it was the wrong choice to make at first. You'll learn that Stella and Meryl actually were possibly not fully convinced that Rose was the right choice for the madam, and that she was just at first a convenient excuse to mend the strife between the three leaders of the women's factions. However, both of them learn that indeed, Rose is the person they need to follow and protect, because she has been fulfilling her role admirably, more so than they ever could, probably. Unfortunately for Rose, when she tries to make an agreement with Caleb, she is captured once again, but this time by the worst person possible, Miguel. Miguel, I believe, is a homosexual because his hatred for women seems too apparent. This is because he believes that they didn't have to suffer the same way men did in the war, and that they had an easy life because they just had to sell their bodies and enjoy the life of that, in that it wasn't hard work and suffering, while Rose tells Miguel earlier that that's not the case, which of course leaves Miguel very pissed at her, and yeah, uncomfortable scene coming up. Rose does explain to Miguel that she's willing to take their offer. Miguel questions her on why they should even listen to her. Unfortunately, her answer leads to Miguel ripping off her clothes and giving her a lot of brutal stabbings. Thankfully, it didn't turn into a rape scene, because visual novels are very happy-go-lucky with rape scenes, let me tell you that. Because of Miguel's sexuality probably preventing him from doing so, and I believe he just wants to dirty women up because he feels it's the justification they get for not having to be dirtied up in the war. At the same time, Caleb is trying to make an agreement with Leo to join his side. Leo refuses because his loyalty, at least at the moment, lies with Rose. Caleb, however, does say if he won't join him, then he needs Leo to leave the city in exchange for not messing with Primvera, as he feels that Leo is the main opposition that he would face. However, before completing this exchange, they learn of Miguel's behavior, and Leo finds a naked and wounded Rose. This scene is probably my favorite in Season 1. Most characters at this point, this would trigger their berserk button. But for Leo, he just rushes over to her, covers her up with a blanket, and simply and sadly walks off. Leo is understanding enough to know this wasn't Caleb's intention, and he knows that causing a struggle right there would endanger Rose. It was this simple scene that I felt really helped shape his character in its entirety into being as wonderful as it is. I felt sad, shocked, and moved all at the same time, and I didn't even need anything that revolting shoved in my face. I didn't need to see Rose's body. It just, the reactions of the characters spoke for themselves. This is what we call subtle writing, and it's wonderful. The simple actions of the characters speak for themselves loudly and clearly, and is another reason why I think Ryukishi is such a great writer. So Leo takes Rose back, and Wayne ends up running off because he feels like it was his responsibility to protect Rose, and he failed at it. Rose is of course somewhat broken, but not in an over-exaggerate manner, as she's mainly very hurt and distraught with herself at the current time, which makes sense as what happened to her was terrible, and she feels like what she believes in to be the right way to handle things was shattered right in front of her. She's forced into hiding, and it's here where we start Chapter 5. Caleb makes a deal with the American forces that if he gathers 100 million Japanese dollars, that they will consider him a partner. a trade he desperately needs to make. Of course, the offer was actually made in jest because of the impossibility of the amount. However, this comes back to bite them because Caleb essentially goes to town on the whole city, gathering money with more ferocity than ever before. This also makes you think that this guy's got his priorities a bit backwards because he's essentially ruining the lives of several Japanese people by doing this, which is really the same people he wanted to help. This is justified, of course, because Caleb feels like the people who lived comfortably and don't help their fellow countrymen deserve no less. Now, this will of course be Caleb's downfall, I can already tell. He's in such a hurry, using so much aggression, and refuses help from anyone that it will come back to haunt him later on. I don't know this, but I can tell. That's how it's gonna play out. It's like Miguel tells him later on when he tries to make a trade with him to help him come up with that 100 million, but Caleb refuses because he would rather die than make a deal with the Chinese. He's making too many enemies, and there's no way he'll be able to fight them all off, even if he's a very dangerous individual himself. I suppose because he feels betrayed by his own country and all the countries surrounding him that he's grown to essentially not trust anyone as a result, perhaps not even the people he's trying to help. Amanda also becomes the new Madam of Primavera, as previously foreshadowed in earlier chapters that she might make such a move. I don't think this was done because Amanda was evil. We've been shown that she has a nice side and that she teaches people English, and I don't believe that this was all a facade that was shown to you. Remember, we've been told that once women get up in age, that they basically lose their place in the prostitute level of comfort. Seems ironic all by itself. So her doing this might be just a response to that insecurity. Caleb's actions are just a response to his previous misgivings, which makes sense as well, as she always felt that Rose's actions were much too dangerous to be taking and much too reckless. So she opts for the safer route, or the route she believes to be safer. I'll be looking forward to see how this character might play out, but more focus will probably be given to Caleb. I have faith in Ryukishi though, because he's so good with characterization. Anyway, the apartment Rose is staying at eventually gets stormed by Caleb's gang, and Duel of the Rose starts playing, and it's non-stop tense and badass from start to finish. Holy moly, this track is awesome and perfectly placed, and this whole scene makes me wish more action scenes in visual novels were treated with this level of care, as most tend to really drag, so the tension is eventually lost. One big example I can say is Muramasa. The action scenes in Muramasa go on for like an hour, literally, while here it's more like 5 to 10 minutes, so the adrenaline can't really run out. That's the thing, you can't make a fight scene go on forever. You can't, because if you do, it gets boring. Yeah, eventually that you're gonna say at one point, when is it going to end? And you don't want that to happen. You want it to be fun, you want it to be exciting. Rose Guns Days gets that down perfectly. They get split up, and Rose has to go hide at Claudia's store. This is because she no longer works at Primavera, so she's less likely to be inspected. Caleb, of course, needs to find Rose and Richard so he can find the savings that Primavera has stored away in order to make up for the remaining money he needs to gather. In the meantime, Leo and Wayne basically reconcile their relationship, as Wayne always felt like he was inferior to Leo, but Leo never considered him as such. He straightens up and begs Leo to teach him how to fight, in which he agrees comically after feeling down that Wayne keeps referring to him as an old man. Eventually, of course, Rose is found once again, and we're treated to another exciting action sequence which wraps up the season. This is easily my favorite cliffhanging ending in a visual novel ever, and it got me psyched for the second season. The credit roll was damn near perfect, and one of the only times I've actually appreciated a credit roll in general because it made the scene feel all the better. While Rose's dialogue might feel a bit on the cheesy side, it's well warranted as long as she develops in the later seasons to get out of this zone. So yeah, Rose Guns Days was amazing, and what can I say? It was hard to complain about it. I know I might have been boring because all I did was basically praise it, but it's other than Alfred, it's like, it's hard to really find any flaws in the first season. It's fun, exciting, I like the characters. Yeah, I think everyone should read it. I'm not going to tell you to get overhyped for it. I just think you should give it a try, you know? And I really hope the remaining seasons are just as fun, and I'm really excited to read them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.